Zukari, the scariest board game ever made, read scrawling silver letters across a slim black box. It was my 21st birthday. My parents were out of town and I'd invited my two closest friends, Brianna and Elise, over to hang out. We'd been making drinks, watching horror movies, and now opening presents. Looks creepy. Is it like Betrayal at House on the Hill? I asked, sliding my fingernail into the seam and breaking the tape. More like Jumanji, she replied, swallowing a sip of hard lemonade. I pulled up the box lid. Inside was a folded board, a deck of cards, a die, and a little baggie of metal game pieces. I slowly unfolded the board, and I had to admit, it was creepy. It depicted a dark forest with towering gnarled trees, and a path of game spaces that twisted and crossed and dead-ended. It's a pretty standard game. Roll a die, go that many spaces, draw a card, do what the card says, and the game isn't over until somebody reaches the cabin. Brianna pointed with the purple lacquered nail to the drawing of a cabin in the far right corner of the board, windows glowing yellow. I pulled the game pieces out one by one, metal spheres with a dot of colored paint on top. I took red, Elise took green, and Brianna took purple. We put all three on the start square. "Why don't you go first, birthday girl?" Brianna asked. I took the die, shook it in my cupped hands, and let it fall. 3. I picked up my game piece and moved it 3 spaces, then reached for the deck and drew a card. Someone or something is watching you. Go back 2 spaces. I lifted my arm to pick up the game piece and paused. "You okay, Kara?" Elise asked. "Yeah, I turned around, looking towards the kitchen. I could have sworn, I don't know. It almost felt like a little gust of air on the back of my neck." I smiled and shook my head. "You're up," I said, handing the die to Elise. "Okay," she said hesitantly, grabbing the die. 5. She moved her piece 5 spaces and then drew a card. It says, "You find wild raspberries. Go forward 1 space." Smiling, she advanced 1 space on the board, putting her marker in the middle of the dark clearing with a small glistening pond. "You're up," I said to Brianna. She rolled a 2, drew a card, and read it out loud. "Clouds roll over the moon. Too dark to see. Lose a turn." At that exact moment, the lights flickered, and then they went out. "Whoop, that was weird," Brianna said in the darkness. "Was there supposed to be a storm tonight?" Elise asked, her voice tinged with fear. I felt her fingers on my hand in the darkness, then interlock with mine. Or could someone have cut our power? "What, you mean like a murderer?" Brianna asked, barely holding in a laugh. "I don't hear any rain or wind or anything, and we are 3 girls home alone." She let out a breath. "Did we lock the doors?" "Elise, it's okay," I said, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. "We get power outages all the time. The wiring out here is shit. Does anyone have their phone? I left mine upstairs." "Yeah, I got mine," Brianna said, rummaging in her pockets. But before she could turn on her flashlight, I felt it. A cool breeze wafting over my bare shoulders and through my hair. But the air was different. Heavy, cool, damp. An earthy smell filled my nostrils, tinged with decay. "Do you smell that?" I asked. "Yeah. Smells like something died," Elise replied, sounding even more scared. But before we could descend into a spiral of panic, white light flashed through the room. Everything was thrown into stark relief from the bright light of Brianna's flashlight. Black shadows stretched behind us, and our faces took on a sunken, creepy appearance, with black shadows sinking into every dimple every line. I looked down and my breath caught in my throat. Nobody was holding my hand. Elise's hands were clasped tightly together in her lap. Elise, were you holding my hand just a minute ago? No, why? Brianna? She shook her head. This is a joke, right? I scanned both of their faces, looking for a hint of a smile. I felt someone holding my hand. This isn't funny, guys. My heart pounded in my chest, and I sucked in a breath, another breath of the damp, earthy air. We weren't holding your hand, okay? Jeez, chill out, Brianna said. Somebody was. Elise's eyes went wide. Maybe somebody broke into the house? You two are so easily scared, it's ridiculous. Brianna rolled her eyes and handed the die to me. Your turn. I took it from her, a lump forming in my throat. It had to be Brianna. She liked to tease people, push their buttons, exaggerate stories into tall tales, make herself the center of attention. Well, I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. I put on a brave face, grabbed the die and rolled it. I moved my piece and then slowly plucked a card from the stack. You find a lost hiker. Go back 3 spaces. I read, confused. Why would that be a bad thing? But then I heard it. A soft, shuffling sound coming from the kitchen. Every muscle in my body froze. Did you hear that? I whispered. Elise nodded at me, her dark eyes wide. Slowly, I forced myself up. I started walking towards the kitchen. It was almost pitch black. The light from Brianna's phone didn't quite reach. I forced my feet forward until I was standing at the entrance of the kitchen. I strained my ears to listen. I thought all I would hear was silence, that the scuffling sound was just my imagination. But instead, I heard the soft, rhythmic rush of air. Breathing. I'm calling the police, I shouted. The light behind me jittered, and then the kitchen lit up in dim tones of gray as Brianna came up behind me with her flashlight. I froze. In the darkness, in the center of the kitchen, stood a man. He faced away from us, wearing hiking clothes. Something dark, like blood, covering his bare legs in patches. My legs felt weak underneath me. I gripped the door frame. Are you okay? I looked back to see Brianna and Elise behind me, but they didn't look scared. I whipped around, but now the kitchen was empty. Did you see that? There was a man. I didn't see anything, Elise said. I ran through the house, Brianna and Elise behind me, but the doors were all still locked. I opened the pantry and looked under the sofa. There was no one there. And I definitely hadn't heard anyone go up the stairs. I guess it had been dark. Maybe my brain interpreted some of the shapes and shadows of the kitchen as someone standing there. I was on edge. Brianna's prank had really messed with my head. We finally sat back down at the board game. Are you sure you want to keep playing? Brianna asked. I hated her tone, like she was talking to a scared little child. Of course I want to keep playing. Why wouldn't I? You just seem a little jumpy. The dark, harsh shadows of her face scrunched into a smile. I grabbed the die of the board and handed it to Elise. Your turn. She glanced between us for a second, then hesitantly took the die. 1, she said, moving her green marker 1 space. Then she drew a card. While taking a swim in the pond, you feel something grab your ankle. Lose a turn. Elise lifted her piece and moved it back. She started for the die. Drip. The 3 of us turned our heads to the foyer. A faucet was dripping, which sometimes happens when the power went out. Our well had an old electric pump that had seen better days. "I'll get it," I said, hoisting myself up and walking into the dark foyer. Brianna and Elise followed, the flashlight bouncing off the dark walls. It didn't sound like it was coming from the kitchen, so I poked my head into the hall bathroom. Not there either, which left only one option: my parents' bathroom. Their bedroom was the only one on the first floor. I made my way into the dark hallway, Brianna and Elise following a few steps behind. The dripping grew louder. I swung the door to the bathroom open. It was coming from the bathtub. I walked over slowly, pulled the shower curtain back, and froze. The bathtub was full of water. It glistened in the darkness, Brianna's flashlight reflecting on the water. My mom must have forgotten to drain it," I said, staring down into the water. But I knew deep down that couldn't be right. My mom used all kinds of bath bombs and fragrant soaps. The water here was odorless, crystal clear. I got on my knees and plunged my hand into the water, reaching for the stopper. It was ice cold. I grimaced as I plunged my hand in further, reaching for the little ring on the stopper, curling my finger to hook into it. The cold felt like little knives across my skin, stabbing me everywhere. I reached deeper. "No!" Elise grabbed my shoulders and pulled me back. I rolled back onto the tile, ice-cold water dripping down my arm, onto my shirt. There was something in there," she panted. Her lips trembled as she stared at the bathtub. "What the hell are you talking about?" Brianna asked. "I saw something, okay?" Elise shot back, with a bite in her voice I've never heard before. "Don't you dare tell me I didn't. There was something dark, moving under the water. It looked like it was going right for Kara, and I—" Okay, Brianna held up her hands in surrender. "I'm not going to fight you on it. Let's just go back into the family room, okay?" She stepped over me, reached down, and quickly pulled the stopper out of the bathtub. A little tornado appeared in the water, followed by the sound of water rushing and gurgling through the pipes. Then she stepped out to the bathroom. Elise and I followed, but as I stepped out of the room, I could have sworn I heard a splash. I lost my turn with the whole moon thing, so it's Kara's turn again, Brianna said, sitting back down on the carpet in front of the board. I sat down, eyeing Elise and Brianna hesitantly. Then I picked up the die and rolled it, moved my game piece, picked a card of the stack and read it out loud. "While hunting for food, you hit the wrong target. Lose a turn." Splat. Something dark and wet fell onto the dead center of the board. What was that?" Brianna asked. For the first time, she sounded scared. I slowly tilted my head and looked up. There was a dark stain in the middle of the ceiling. With every second it grew larger, as if something upstairs, right above us, was quickly bleeding out into the floor. I grabbed Elise and stared at the stain, too scared to move. "We need to get out of here." Clack. Brianna had already rolled her die. She grabbed a card, then it slipped out of her hands, falling onto the board and soaking into the blood. The mushrooms were poisonous. Go back to start. And then she began to retch. Horrible, choking coughs filled the room as she doubled over. She crawled forward across the carpet and began to vomit. "Call 911!" I screamed at Elise as I grabbed her by the shoulders and tried to hold her up. "Try to keep her from choking on it." Elise pulled out her phone. "There's no reception," she cried, fingers frantically moving over the screen. "No reception!" Brianna's body lurched in my arms as she threw up again. Vomit spilled over the carpet, threaded with blood. And then she was still. "Oh my God, Brianna? Brianna?" I grabbed her phone and started to dial 911, its flashlight bouncing all over the room. But Elise was right. The call didn't even connect. No network. I motioned to Elise. Each of us put Brianna's arms over our shoulders and we began to hoist her up. "You're going to be okay," I said softly. "We're going to take you to the hospital." "We have to keep playing," she said weakly, blood-stained vomit dripping down her chin. "We have to reach the cabin." "Okay, we'll keep playing," I said in a calm voice, exchanging a look with Elise. "But first we're just going to get you checked up." "Listen to me," she screamed, her voice hoarse. Elise and I froze. "We have to keep playing. We have to reach the cabin," she tore away from us, breathing hard, wavering on unsteady feet. "This isn't just some game. Zukari it's fucked up. I only brought it here because Dave forced me to. He was going to hurt me if I didn't." Another drop of liquid splattered on the game board. "If we don't reach the cabin, if we don't finish the game, we all die." She collapsed back into the carpet, breathing hard. Then, with a shaking, vomit-covered hand, she grabbed the die. "Kara, your turn." She held it out to me. I paused, staring at the die. Then I shook my head. "I don't know what the fuck is going on here, but I'm out." And with that, I turned on my heel and marched straight for the door. But it wouldn't open. What the fuck? I tugged at the door with all my might. It didn't budge. With a scream, I grabbed my mom's expensive vase off the front table and threw it at the window. It shattered to a million pieces, but the window didn't even crack. Maybe we should just finish the game. I whirled around to see Elise standing behind me. She stared at me with wide, dark eyes. "Please, Kara," she whispered. "I don't want to die." "We're not going to die. This is just some stupid prank." "Then why can't we open the door? Why can't we call anyone?" I looked at the door, my heart sinking. Then I slowly walked back towards the family room. The smell of decay had intensified. Damp, cold air clung to my skin. I stepped into the room and crunch. Something was under my feet. I looked down to see a few dried leaves laying on top of the carpet. And that's when I noticed the room was different. A pale yellow moon hung outside the window. Even though by this hour it should have been high in the sky, a green lichen bloomed on the rough gray upholstery of the sofa. The blind cords hung down to the floor like veins, and the mass of tangled cords that ran to the TV looked like roots twisted around each other. I swallowed and sat across from Brianna. Without a word, I took the die, let it fall, drew my card. I let out a sigh of relief. You cross a stream and stop for a drink. Go forward 2 spaces. I advanced my game piece, then handed the die, now coated in a thin layer of vomit and blood, to Elise. I could feel her hand shake as she took it from me. Elise's eyes widened as she stared at the card. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Just a horrible, choking sound. And then I heard it. A sound I've only heard once before in my life, more than a decade ago, but filled me with absolute terror. A soft, rattling sound, coming from the corner of the room. Elise slowly turned her card around, and I saw the words, "Rattlesnake attack. Go back to start." A soft, slithering sound echoed across the room. Elise scrambled back, climbing up onto the sofa. I glanced down at the carpet in the dim light, trying to pinpoint the snake's location. But it wasn't carpet anymore. Wet muck covered with decaying, damp leaves, twisted roots and jagged rocks. The slithering sound grew louder and I froze, staring into the darkness in the direction of the sound. "Kara," Brianna choked. "You have to finish the game." I glanced at the board. I was 7 spaces away from the cabin. Just a few more turns and I could make it to the cabin. I snatched the die. It stuck to my fingers, staining them red. I let it go and it tumbled across the painted trees. 3. Shit. I have to roll a 5 or a 6 to make it next turn. I snatched the card from top of the deck, and all the blood drained out of my face. It's behind you. Go back 1 space. I immediately felt warm breath on the back of my neck. I squeezed my eyes tight, trying not to imagine what it was, but I'd seen a shadow in my peripheral vision stretching out behind me. A shadow with long, spindly arms reaching out for me. The rattling sound jolted me back into action. It was loud, only several feet away from me. Elise was crumpled into the couch, crying. Brianna was retching. I grabbed the die, shook it, and let it fall. 6. Relief flooded me. I grabbed my red game piece and dropped it on the cabin. I looked up at Elise, shaking and staring at me, and Brianna, pale and trembling, lying on the floor. But they were alive, and there was only silence. We never spoke of Zukari again. Over the coming months, Brianna, Elise, and I grew apart. After graduation, Elise went on to get her bachelor's. Brianna left Dave and got a job in the city. I stayed here, living with my parents as I continued at the IT company I'd been interning with. But over the past few weeks, I've been seeing things. Like a few days ago, I woke up in the middle of the night and saw a man in bloodstained hiking clothes facing away from me, standing still in my hallway. Or when I took a bath to unwind from a particularly hard day at work and felt something brush my ankle. Or when I felt a gust of warm breath on the back of my neck as I made myself dinner. And then there was last night. I woke up in the middle of the night, around 4 a.m., and saw something outside that made my blood run cold. A golden light shining through the windows of an old abandoned cabin. And what Brianna said echoed in my mind. The game isn't over until you reach the cabin.